Okay, so joining me on the panel, take a seat, gents, is Alan Fecteau of Boeing Business Jets, Tobias from Comlux, Eric Jullien from Airbus Corporate Jets, and Tom Chatfield. These very distinguished panel know an awful lot more about VVIP than the rest of us in the room. But I'm going to start by setting the scene. We're talking VVIP aircraft. So I don't want any talk about climate change, climate control, offsetting, grass on aircraft, nothing. It just doesn't apply to this segment of the market. So, you know, let's have a proper discussion around VVIP. We all do our bit for the environment, but this is not that topic. What we've been asked to talk about is essentially this particular segment of the market. It is quite a distinguished segment. The profile of the buyers, the owners, the operators is a little different to the rest of the market. I think it's safe to say it's a smaller segment on the market. It's very refined. But what we do find is that the advisors in this particular section of the market tend to probably, I would say, predominantly deal only in this section of the market. You know, it's very much done on word of mouth. I suppose to kick it off, how do we distinguish this market from the rest of the world? Or how do you distinguish yourselves, Airbus, Boeing, etc., from Bombardier and Gulfstream? So I'm coming to you and I say, I'm looking at a lovely 650 or I'm looking at a 7500. How do you swing me into your segment of the market? Do you want to start, Tobias?
Yeah, I think it's a market where you have an asset that allows a full customization, basically. So you can really make the aircraft of your dreams and a cabin of your dreams, and you can tailor it completely to what you want to and how you want to use this aircraft. And I think that is a main separator from the classical business jets. So it gives you just a number of degrees of freedom more that you can make that your aircraft.
Yeah, I would add to that not only can you customize it the way you want, you've got the space to do it. So, I mean, starting from a BBJ or an ACJ and then moving up to the wide body, you can go up to more than 500 square meters of space, which is pretty considerable.
Yeah, if I can add to that, is exactly that, is a space. I mean, we talk about real estate and a surface. You're starting at 80 square meters. I mean, a lot of them live in London, that's where they live in. And we're talking about stand-up cabin, and we're talking about wide number of options, different rooms, systems. So, as Tobias put it, it's, I would nearly say, unlimited freedom there.
Alec?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that. They're very different airplanes for some similar, but some very different methods of travel. When it comes to the VVIP, and you're looking at a bizliner, which is basically what we're talking about, there are a number of things that you have in a bizliner that you don't have in a traditional large, ultra-large, or long-range business jet. And that is the separate private rooms, the ability to have your walk-by aisles, the ability to have the full-size showers, and the room that some people in this segment demand. We have customers who own both, and the customers that own both distinguish between the two. Although you can fly 14, 15 hours in something like a G650 or a Global 7500, most of the ones who own both prefer to fly anything more than 5 or 6 hours in a bizliner because of that additional space and room. When you have crew members that take up a substantial portion of a smaller airplane cabin for crew rest, and then when the principal goes to bed, you still have private rooms available, full galleys, and so forth. So it's a different travel experience that lends itself to a bit different clientele. And given the entry level is about probably 25 to 30% more money than a Gulfstream on the higher end or the competitors, you're looking at people who are in these airplanes. Normally, if they're buying a new one, they're probably a 1 billion net worth or more in order to get to the, say, the entry-level BBJ or ACJ.
So let's just talk a bit about the profile of these buyers. I mean, we all know it's typically heads of state that the theory is, you donate an ACJ to a particular head of state, and then he encourages his airlines to buy Airbus or Boeing. That's the theory. What about everybody else? In terms of heads of state makes sense. You have presidents, Air Force One, all these kind of people, and aircraft. But who are the others? Who are these billionaires? Are they business people? Why are they buying this particular aircraft? It can't just be for comfort. 110, 120 million just for comfort doesn't quite cut it.
What you have, roughly speaking, is you have half government and the other half are private individuals. We see in a typology of customers that a lot of them have large families, so they enjoy the extra space, the extra bedroom, and these people being on a very tight schedule, that's what some customers are telling us. At the end of the day, the quality time with a family, they actually find it during the flight when they go to the yearly holiday. So this is one type of customer where it's a purely private tool that you could maybe look a bit like a yacht. On the other hand, you also have customers who look at it as a working tool where they do several meetings. They are allowed to do like transatlantic flights every day. And then they benefit from connectivity, high-speed internet, video conferencing. So among the private market, you really have the two different type of customers.
Sure.
When it comes to this market, just to clarify that a little bit, about 50% of our market for our BBJs is private. So only about 30% is head of state when it comes to the BBJ 737 size. In the larger airplanes, that mix is a little bit different. But there's a couple other features that are very important in this market, and that's the things that Eric has mentioned, but also the ability to take a security contingent if you want. Some of these large business owners require larger staffs, and they can bring them along without having to charter a separate jet. So it's a very effective business tool when they can bring their entire team with them. There's provisions for self-defense systems as well, and high-speed secure communications, which are, of course, available on some of the smaller airplanes, but it's a much easier installation and fix on something like this. So there are some attributes that allow the bizliner to affect their business a little bit better.
Sure.
I think when you're moving into the wide body segment also, there's a segregation of staff. The flight crew basically, aside from the cabin crew, really don't come in contact with the principals. And the same thing with the entourage that's traveling. That tends to be very, very important. So there's really distinct areas in that part of the aircraft which you can never do in a smaller aircraft.
Okay, can we have a chat about the actual process then? So I go to Airbus, Boeing, and I say, I'd like a green aircraft, and Comlux, I'd like you to do the interior. Tom, you could give me a hand. I'll throw you a couple of grand a month, and let's see how it goes. The actual completion process, so if you're taking green and creating your bespoke aircraft, you want it to look like the yacht or the office or whatever. Can we have a chat about that? Because it is a massive, I haven't been through it with clients, it is a massively complicated process, and it is very important to get it right and get the right team to basically avoid wasting time. But also, and something we had spoken about with Airbus and Boeing is the warranty clock. Once I take it out of ACJ or out of Boeing, then the clock on the warranty starts. So I can't afford to spend 2 years doing an interior. Do you want to talk about that, the process? Probably Comlux and Tom, maybe, start it.
So I think the important thing is, as an owner or as a person who's intending to acquire that aircraft, one of the most important things is to put together a team very early, possibly even before you buy the aircraft. Because what you want to do is define what the requirements are and kick off that initial listing of what are those aspects or layouts that you want to have in that aircraft right from the beginning. Make sure that whether Airbus or Boeing is capable of actually doing that for the aircraft. And then from there, once you've moved past the aircraft purchase, is really starting that engineering, using the designer that you've chosen, and having a very integrated team right from the very beginning. You cannot just have a designer go out and design something and you try to make it as a completion center. If you have the completion center, the designer, and the completion manager working very closely together, you end up having a very effective aircraft that's built in a very timely manner, and it's going to be reliable, it's going to be well thought of, it's going to be intuitive to use too. So I think you have a very high quality product at the end. If you don't do that, your risk just goes crazy.
And I suppose that's your job, Tobias, is managing expectations, costs, timing.
Absolutely, yes. And it may seem a complex process, but at the same time, it has been in place since a number of years, and we're not doing rocket science in that sense. We're doing fantastic interiors that are spectacular. But the process of getting there, I think, is well proven and well known. And there's enough knowledgeable individuals and entities in the world that can advise clients to do that in the right sequence and right order. So I don't see any major issues in getting there. You have a number of choices, and maybe more choices than on traditional business jets, but that's well manageable.
So where do you find the challenges, Alex?
Well, actually, one of the challenges, that's a good segue. One of the challenges that we find is in the initial sale of the aircraft. Oftentimes in the past, our Boeing salespeople and others who are selling bizliners will say that the process is, we will deliver you a green airplane, and then we explain what a green airplane is, and then we say, then we'll let you hire a designer, of which there are maybe 14 to 16 that we would recommend, and then we'll let you hire your own completion center. And we turn this into a big, long, complex process. To the principal who's buying this airplane, they don't have the time, energy, or desire to engage in that. So what we tell the principal is that we have this airplane that will do these things for you, and this is your business tool or your personal tool, and we will give you a completed airplane. Although the timeline's a little bit long, we can do everything for you in-house, what we call a turnkey operation. Behind the scenes, we would hire a designer, we would hire a completion manager, we'd hire a completion center, but the initial thing we want to do is we want to sell the airplane as a tool, and it's something that is not complex, but something that is actually we can work through with the customer and give them something they want without having them to get too involved or too into the complexity of that. So we would separate into two things: the initial sale, so that it doesn't look overly complicated and complex, and then the behind the scenes where we would go through this whole process.
How are you pricing that? I mean,
Pardon?
if I come to you as Boeing and I say, okay, I want to buy one, and I want you to manage the completion, so you keep Tobias in shape.
Right.
But how are we pricing it from the outset? You know, before you've even gone through the designs and the.
Well, we have a set price for the different models of airplanes, which is for the green airplane, and then we have an approximate range for an interior depending on the options. So we will give the customer an approximate range, and then as we go through the process, we'll negotiate the price for the green airplane and then the interior design. Because the interior design can vary widely if we do something like an all business class for a charter, anywhere from 10 or 12 million to 40 or 50 million for a full BBJ 737 model, anywhere up to 200 million for a head of state 747 or 777. So.
If I can add and rejoice, Alex, as an OEM, even if we sell a green aircraft, we have a responsibility towards the customer in the market to make sure that his completion project works well. And that's right, as Tom highlighted, the best way is the customer has a team and is capable of running the project. But then again, quite often the customer is coming from a traditional business jet, and our role as an OEM is to help him in putting together the pieces that is missing. It can be the turnkey, the word was mentioned earlier on, but also it can be an a la carte cabin service where if you are missing the initial part, which is a tech spec, and the design package will do that for you. If you want us to have a closer look at program management, we do that. And this is something that we are developing to help our customer. At the end of the day, it is not more complex than building a yacht, but we are there to help and to help them where they need it.
Yeah, I think the important thing is that whether the owner chooses Airbus or Boeing or someone like myself, to project manage it, it's critical that you have a project manager from the beginning. You know, we've run into situations where an owner has gone out and said, you know, my friend Mike has bought a 737, I want to have one too, has got a wonderful legal document to buy that aircraft, and then basically runs aground, just not knowing what to do next. And that's a terrible experience for that person. So our suggestion is really get the right person right from the beginning to start project managing it, because the reason that owner is wealthier in that position is not because they're an aircraft person. That's not their area of specialty.
100%. I mean, I sat in Toulouse with Airbus, and the owner's design team had been at it for 3 months. But the Airbus engineer looked at it and said, well, it'll be a beautiful aircraft, but it'll never take off. You know, that the weight of it was too much. So back to the drawing board. The project manager, certainly from the legal perspective, we need you, because the actual contract and in negotiating the contract is very important for managing expectations more than anything else. It's just making sure that the owner realizes where the limits are, I guess. It is a little bit, I mean, there's obviously a business side to it, but there is the world of the bonkers as well. You know, the clients that buy one because they can. It's more of a want than a need. How do you manage those particular types of clients? Because they are very difficult, in my experience. You know, you're on a completely different level. I had one guy, you know, he wanted a mood room, and he wanted, instead of a shower, he wanted to be able to sit on the ground cross-legged and bring the water over his head. And when I said, you know, wouldn't a shower be better for resale value, he just looked at me, you know, as if I had two heads. If, you know, I won't be selling this. This is my aircraft. Tell us a bit about that, your experiences. How do you manage it from a fairly serious perspective? I mean, how do you manage it, particularly as an OEM? You know, your reputation's at stake here, I guess.
We do have our own designer, who is somebody who knows how to take the intents from the private person and to translate that into a certifiable design. Of course, you always have the specific request where you need to handle it diplomatically, but technically, and that's again where Region Tom, you need to be at the beginning, to be driving it, to avoid as well managing, you need to manage the expectation to avoid the disappointment. Every time there is no magic recipe. Is really anticipate, accompany, listen to the customer. You cannot just impose your design. You need to listen to what he wants and to translate it in something you can certify. And one point I just want to allude quickly as well is where it is also useful is for the financiers, because the financier doesn't want a plane to be standing like 2 years into outfitting. He doesn't want either to have a cabin that is too complex or that is not a liquid cabin. And that is there as well, that we can guide everybody through the process to make sure that at the end of the day, it's a product that fits requirements, that is affordable, financeable, and technologically sound.
So this is a good point to raise, is in terms of it's difficult to get finance on a bespoke aircraft. There's no doubt about it. The banks tend to be nervous of these particular aircraft, probably due to resale. In terms of residual value and this particular asset as one that you would look at favorably from a financing perspective, how does it compare? You know, how does it compare to the rest of the market?
When it comes to the financing, our experience is actually a little different. We've run into several financing arms who are eager to finance these. The point being that people with the kind of money available to buy one of these, they have the reserves available and they have the ability to provide collateral for it. So it's a little bit less of an issue from what I've seen. And when it comes to the residual values, I actually put a chart up just in case it came up for the conversation, but there's an important differentiation between this segment and the other ultra-large or ultra-long range segment. And although the acquisition price is 25 to 30% higher for a BBJ, I would draw your attention to the chart here on the right. And this is not necessarily depreciation. Typical depreciation that we find in our own tracking and that we have seen industry-wide is in the low single digits, 3 to 3.5% range for a bizliner, whereas typically for other business jets, it's in the 9 to 11% range. So when you think about the numbers, you'll find that 3%, 3.5% off a $100 million airplane is $3 million a year. 9% off of a $80 million airplane is $7 million a year, and of course that decreases over time. So you'll find that when it comes to operating costs being fairly similar, Bizliner burns more fuel, but the engine program costs are much, much lower. The operating costs are fairly similar. The main cost is not the operating cost. The main cost is the loss of asset value in terms of depreciation. In the chart here that I was pointing out on the right, or on your left side, the top bar is the Bizliner line, and the green and yellow are the heavy jet and the long-range jet. And what these are not quite depreciation, but this is the Bank of America Merrill Lynch price indicator. And the difference between the two, as I understand it, is that they look at the value of a 5-year-old pre-owned airplane. So this is important for, say, brokers in the room or people who deal with pre-owned. So they look at the value of a 5-year-old pre-owned airplane, and then they look at the value of that same of a 5-year-old airplane the next year to see how much of its value is retained. And so these numbers will differ from residual values. And if I pulled out my calculator when I looked at this, and the top blue line for a Bizliner is about 2%. So for a pre-owned airplane, you're losing about 2% per year over the long term. Whereas if with the heavy jets here, you're looking at about 11.5%. So
why is there such a difference? What's the reason?
Well, it's typical reasons that airplanes either depreciate or they don't. An asset, in terms of an airplane, depreciates because either something newer or better has come out, and so its price has dropped, or it has consumed a significant portion of its useful life. In terms of a Bizliner that's built to fly 3,500 hours a year and flies 400 hours a year, you can have a 10-year-old Bizliner that's effectively like a new airplane commercially. It's maybe got 1 or 2 years of commercial service on it. So the engines are never going to come off that airplane. The inspections are fewer and further between, and they're industrial-built machines that are built to go at 10 times the rate. If you look at like a brake stack on another typical ultra-large business jet, and then you look at one off of an ACJ or 737, you'll see a pretty significant difference in weight and thickness and quality and stuff like that. And one's built for 400 hours a year, one's built for 4,000. So in terms of the usage, it's much less, but also in terms of the fact that there's an installed fleet of, at least in the case of the 737, 10,000 airplanes around the world. So parts are easier to come by, they're much more ubiquitous and so forth. So there's a number of reasons, most of which have to do with the fact that the airplane has used so much less of its useful life, at least one of the major factors.
So isn't that something, this may come across as naive or even bordering on a stupid question, but why is there not the ability to take a 10-year-old ACJ and convert it and sell it back into the commercial market and get another 20 years out of it? Why don't you manufacture the ACJ so that can be done?
There's one simple reason. There's actually a few. First of all, if you do that, you are going to lose the value of your cabin. Secondly, you will need then to reconfigure into an airline configuration, which means you need to buy one cheap set of seats, which will put you in a waiting list with the seat suppliers. And lastly, all the fuel tank provisions, the airline don't want that. So even if the aircraft is very attractive because, as mentioned by Alex, it did not use a lot of potential on the engines, on the LLPs, at the end of the day, that aircraft is better staying on the business jet market, and also because there's a limited number of ACJs available on the market, the natural buyer is another ACJ owner. And in practically, we haven't seen aircraft going back in the airline, and vice versa is also true. Retrofitted airliners will miss all the structural provisions for the tanks that are specific items installed on production. So to cut a long story short, the two markets do not communicate.
I would say there is a niche, though, between the two, and that would be if you had an older ACJ or you had an older BBJ, there is the potential to, once that cabin is tired, to turn that into a shuttle configuration, for example, for an all business class shuttle. A small niche, but it is one that you can use that aircraft for.
I would say never.
Yeah.
So there's always, as you say, a niche where that application could happen. We have requests like that. It may happen or may not, but it's not maybe the most likely scenario, but it's possible, definitely. And people will appreciate that the aircraft hasn't flown much and is well equipped and has a long range.
Well,
so
it just makes sense, doesn't it? You're taking
Yeah.
low hours frame, you're taking low hours engines, and you're selling it into, you know, a fairly lucrative commercial market. A young aircraft, you'd get quite a lot of money for that if you could do it.
Yeah, well, there's also, there's one other factor. When you're selling a bizliner, the prices are higher than what you're going to find a pre-owned commercial airplane for one, because of the usage, right? So it's going to be quite a bit more expensive. It's going to take money to pull out the interior, take money to install a new interior. And oftentimes, if you have an 8, 10, or 12, or 15-year-old airplane, they're a little more difficult to make work financially in a commercial environment when the rest of the fleet is much newer and much more fuel efficient, and they're getting a lot better revenue and a lot lower cost per available seat mile. So the economics we've found do not quite lend themselves to that market, at least to this point. A better market actually is probably converting them to cargo when it comes to using these airplanes as cargo airplanes. We'll find that, say, a 15 to 20-year-old 737-800, for example, can be had for around $15 million. And if you're just carrying boxes around it, what's FedEx charge, $40 a pound? The revenue and the cost is a lot better when it comes to cargo for something that's used like that.
Sure. So let's talk about the resale market then. So, you know, in one fell swoop, my entire commercial market is gone. Who is buying? So it's as in your own words, this is the multi-billionaires market. These are the people who can afford it. They don't necessarily need finance. Are they likely to buy a 15-year-old ACJ that has been fitted to somebody else's taste and standards? And if not, who is buying it?
No, I think that there's a market out there for persons who are not ultra-high net worths, that are looking for a good, reliable, large cabin aircraft that might be, as Alex says, 15 years old, and they either refurb the interior, doing soft goods and hard goods, bringing it up to date on avionics and perhaps SATCOM. And then you have an aircraft there that's sitting at the cost of a Challenger 650 that's much, much more capable. And as Alex said, the operating costs aren't that much higher. You know, it can be a very, very attractive aircraft. And there are quite a few older BBJs that are getting to that point where it can become quite an interesting market.
One thing about the finances when it comes to those pre-owned airplanes, you've already let someone else take the vast majority of the depreciation on those first 5 to 10 years as well. So the residual values of those really maintain themselves. So people who are a little bit more concerned about finances at a little bit lower level seem to do well with those. And we haven't seen too many, at least in terms of the BBJ, having been refitted interior-wise. We've seen some, but the vast majority have been satisfied and buy them outright.
Yeah, just do a very light refurb.
Yep.
One interesting comment was about the pricing point, because these older bizliners, they get into a pricing point comparable with traditional business jets, and we do have first-time owners that on top of that might not necessarily want to wait. We do also have some government in development areas that can have a very good high-capacity aircraft at a lower capital cost. So we see there is a demand there that is still sustained. It's another type of demand, but it's something that maybe we wouldn't grab with a brand new aircraft with a waiting time and a capital cost required.
Sure. Just to take a couple of the questions from the audience, here's one for you, Eric. Will we see an ACJ A220 in the near future?
I'm afraid I will pass on this. I will pass on this one.
Tom, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think it'd be an excellent aircraft. We've given it some thought ourselves. A perfect airframe for it. Yep, modern airplane.
Boeing?
I can't really speak to that. There won't be a BBJ 220.
This is bound to be Paul Gibelli. Which lawyer is most likely to buy a 20-year-old ACJ? So has anybody any questions from the audience, by the way? Feel free to tap in. One of the things I did want to ask you about is this market, and it's the sea change that seems to be happening in terms of what owners, what users want out of corporate aviation. One of the things I know TAG did very well, Graham headed it up, was the Four Seasons, call it the airliner concept, where you take one of your Airbus commercial, I think in that one, or Boeing, and you convert it into the VIP, and then they took them around the world on the Four Seasons, the National Geographic. Do you see much of a market for that? Is that a market segment that you would chase down as an OEM?
Clearly, this is a market where we see great opportunities. One of them is what we call these premium private flights, and Four Seasons is a perfect example. We see other categories in sporting teams, because sporting teams are becoming more global. We see that with NFL, with Arsenal, with soccer teams from a European league. So there is a business there, something that is not as bespoke as a VIP, but is of a higher standard as an airliner, and definitely that is creating new demand. Also, maybe, as was mentioned, absorbing used aircraft. So yes, it's a promising business sector.
Tobias?
Absolutely. I mean, Comlux is operating a 777 in that configuration, and we see a good demand for that. And it's definitely an application. It makes sense to travel like that. So, perfect.
This is a good question. Do Boeing and Airbus recommend their customers taking the OEM engine programs? Resale might not be primary, but how about AOG avoidance?
Yeah, well, I don't think that it's necessary in terms of resale, but it's probably the typical decision. I think about a quarter of the BBJ customers in the 737 market are on an engine program. And of course, the average time between when the engine comes off the wing is, 17,000 cycles or so is when half those engines will come off the wing. So that's between 35 and 60 years in the future. The problem comes in terms of if a customer decides they want to not risk an AOG. Now, an AOG for at least a BBJ, and I think similarly an ACJ, is an absolute fraction of what it is for other airplanes. Anecdotally, anyway, friends of mine who fly the G650 have said that about half have, a dozen AOGs a year sometimes. Half don't, half are more reliable. You'll never find that, I won't say never, but you'll never find that in a BBJ or an ACJ, to my knowledge. The reliability is so much higher. But on the other hand, periodically, the airplanes share a similar engine in the CFM, you'll have a periodic IDG go bad. And so if you're concerned about that and the high cost of that every third or fourth year or something, or whenever it goes bad, maybe every 10 years, then maybe the engine program is pretty good. In terms of the engine program price, it's actually fairly economical on these bizliner engines relative to the smaller engines. Even though they're 60 to 80% more thrust, the hourly cost is quite a bit less than on a GE bizliner engine than it is on a Rolls-Royce bizjet engine. So it's economical if you feel the need for the extra security and you can afford it, then probably a good thing to do. If not, it's probably not a must-have, but certainly nice to have. I'm not sure if you have different experience with our other OEM.
No, I mean, yeah, we use the same technology of engine. We clearly don't recommend it if you feel that gives you an extra safety, but it's clearly not a recommendation. What we recommend is access to a pool, of course, to have accessibility of a spare engine, but that's more or less it. In terms of secondary market, the ACJs available on the market, none of them has an engine program, and it's not preventing them from being moved around. So we don't see a competitive advantage there. As you mentioned, it's really like if you're in operation, you want that extra safety, why not?
What about the interiors, though? I mean, I take your point on the frame and the engines, but if I'm telling you I like pink velvet and mood swings and all the rest of it, mood swings, mood rooms. But how reliable? I mean, first of all, who is warranting the interior? I mean, if something is not working, who am I blaming? Because I'm going to find someone to blame.
You're not blaming somebody, are you?
Typically, the completion center that gives a warranty.
So that would be Comlux?
That would be us,
Okay.
absolutely. But we're very, very confident. We're giving if the customer demands for it, up to 5 years for the warranty on the interior. So that's pretty good, I would say. You're well covered, I would say.
But I would jump in there. If you do really good planning and you've got your designer and you've got the completion center and your completion manager working well together, then you're designing reliability and right from the very beginning. And basic things like saying any RLRU that would fail or could easily fail during normal operations, if you design it that it can be removed, installed, or replaced and tested within 1 hour, that's a totally different way of doing it. And so the warranty impact is very, very small. And the completion centers don't have as much stress with it.
Are you concerned about Gulfstream and Bombardier? Do you have any concerns in terms of them taking your market? Or put it this way, what is your market share and is it under threat from Bombardier, Gulfstream or Embraer?
Well, I don't know that it's under threat. They have a much larger proportion of the market than we do. The numbers are fairly clear. But I do think that some of that could be attributable to a lack of understanding about the benefits, costs, and residual values of a business jet bizliner. I think that there's a value story there that's very compelling in terms of private owners, in terms of certainly heads of state, and even the charter market. Although the charter market is a little more sensitive to the cost of acquisition, and when the cost of acquisition is 30 to 40 million more, that's pretty substantial when you're trying to make money off that airplane. So we find that charters often go to more in the pre-owned market since they're still relatively new, but the cost is quite a bit less. But I don't really see that as a threat to the market. It seems like the threat's already happened, so we're probably trying to claw a little bit back.
I suppose in a way I'm asking you, what's your sales pitch? So I'm sitting in front of you and I said, it's a lovely, shiny new G650, it's extended range. I can go even longer than
Well, as long as you ask, I'll say that you can go 7,000 miles in a low cabin altitude with triple the space and economics that are far more compelling and reliability that's in a completely different league.
7,000 miles? Really? Is that the same with the ACJ?
That's where we are targeting. We are very close to that. Then it all depends on your cabin weight. But clearly the point is we're selling space. And as we say, space, you enjoy that in every flight. 7,500 nautical miles is once in a while. Of course, there is competition. At one stage, an owner has to decide whether he wants to fly fast, long, with a limited payload, or on the contrary, he wants to go into a flying apartment. A lot of owners actually have both. It's so, of course, there's competition, but there's room for everybody, and competition makes us better. We see, for example, the traditional jets are getting larger. Now the new products are being sold with 5-zone cabin. So somewhere there is a recognition, there is a need for space, and the range can only take you that far. You're not getting any more critical city pairs after a certain range. So I believe now the race is for space, and that's clearly the bizliners market.
Tom, you agree?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the owner too and what their requirements are. I don't think there's all that many owners that are consistently driving or flying their aircraft 7,000 miles. So it ends up then becoming a question: do I want to have space and want to have comfort? Exactly like you said, plan my flight in such a way that I can sleep in a proper bed and arrive refreshed when I arrive when the aircraft lands. That's a huge advantage. It really is.
So just finish up. Thanks, Al. Are you worried about supersonic? Do you think, I've got a lot of cash, I'm going to look for an aircraft and this one's going to get me there in twice the time, and they've solved the boom problem, so, we're not even flying over water anymore. Is this, that presumably the type of people who will buy the supersonic aircraft will be your key customers?
They will be clearly in that category of a very bespoke niche market at a high pricing point. So, of course, again, it's all an issue of alternative. What do you value the most? Whether it's going to take away a lot of customers, we're not talking about the green stuff, but I believe it's not so much the competitive positioning, it's more the fuel burn, the impact of this aircraft will have. So, of course, there will be a competitor, but it's not our main cause of concern, to be honest.
You'll pull out Greta Thunberg at that point. Fair enough.
Yeah, I actually think that's going to be more of a threat to the G700, Global 7500, because in that segment of the market, every 1/100th of a Mach seems to get an ultra high net worth individual to say, I want the fastest airplane, so I want that. When in fact, 0.925, 0.93, it's, to me, that's a really inconsequential increase in speed relative to a 0.91 or a 0.90. But when you start going to 1.4, now that's a real difference. That's a quantum change, even if you can only do it over the sea for 2/3 of the flight. And at the same time, you're going to be nearly doubling the price, so that's going to be a fairly small market to start. At the same time, I think the ranges are pulled back to 4.5 to 5,000 miles or so on those initial supersonic airplanes. So there'll be a niche market for those that have to be the fastest and highest and furthest and newest. But
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, Val. Cheers.